you very much, Harold. Now moving on to some other stories this evening, the Liberty Life Insurance Group has regained control of its information technology system after a major hacking incident. But questions remain about measures put in place to prevent the security breach. Liberty Holdings' share price took a knock as the insurer battled to contain the breach in its IT system. The company assured consumers that it had everything in control in just days after the hacking was brought to light. Meanwhile, the company says there is no evidence that any of its customers suffered any financial losses. The investigation is said to be at an advanced stage. The breach seems to have largely affected emails and attachments. It's over now to my colleague Harold Bopalamo to unpack the story.
Thanks, Q. Joining us on the phone line to unpack the story is Trey Mujaparue, a cybersecurity specialist at Eon Trading. Did I pronounce your name right, Trey?
Yes, you did. But you won't get any points for it, though.
Well, thank you very much for that. And thanks for joining us. I'm sure you've kept up with the whole story about Liberty. I don't want to overdo the Liberty angle of it too much. I want to talk more generally about cybersecurity issues, but let's start with Liberty. You have followed that story.
Yes, I have followed the story indeed.
What would you say best practice is in ensuring that you, well, at least to the best of your abilities, that this doesn't happen to you, and what you do afterwards?
So if I heard that question correctly, it was what do we do to ensure this doesn't happen to an organization, and what we do after it does happen? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. There are a lot of things that could be done. So, for instance, it always starts with policy, and it starts with sort of like risk appetite. Now, in fairness to Liberty, there is no such thing as preventing something like this from happening. Nowadays, in the time that we live in, these things, it's not a matter of if it happens, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. But that being said, there are a lot of things that can be put in place. There are soft controls around policies, and there are technical controls, all of which I'm quite sure Liberty have in place today.
Yeah. And once it happens?
And when it happens, then you're kind of in sort of firefighting mode, which means you need to make sure that you have what we in the business call cyber resiliency. So you need to be able to respond appropriately to such an attack that happens on your organization. Typically, what would happen in organizations that have relatively good established information security practices is that they will anticipate such an attack happening, and then they will go through some sort of a playbook to determine if this happens, who do we notify, what do we do, what is our risk appetite, and how do we contain this. And I believe, given that this happened only this weekend, and Liberty have put out statements announcing, talking to that it hasn't impacted their customers' data, then it occurs to me that they have indeed got a good incident response in their organization.
But in general, I mean, how well prepared would you say, and because this was a financial institution, so it's maybe confined to that, how well prepared do you think financial institutions are? Let's talk in the South African context for these eventualities.
From my research, I believe that there is room for improvement for South African institutions when it comes to information security, and I don't say that lightly. There is room for improvement for every institution. That is institutions not just in South Africa, but sticking with the South Africa thing. I think cybersecurity and security awareness is something that could do with a lot more promotion. So that people are aware of the kind of things that can happen and the various impacts to their data. Typically, when these sorts of attacks happen, the uproar is primarily around the loss of privacy, so customer data. So you'd have noticed that Liberty were quick to talk to the fact that customer data was not impacted in this case.
Right.
However, they have lost what I would consider confidential information, seeing as the attack impacted their mail system.
And I mean, we had this discussion with another IT expert last week, and you mentioned the concern about privacy issues, but there's also a big issue. I doubt that it happened in this instance, but a big issue about business continuity, which frequently happens. So, given that this was a ransom-related attack, it could very well have been pay me or I release the data, or pay me and I'll let you have your systems back. And, in other words, I've captured your systems, and unless you pay, you're not getting them back, right? I mean, that could very well have happened.
Yes, indeed. And that has happened. That happened, I think, last year with the WannaCry virus that impacted the UK's National Health Service computer system. The virus itself impacted the system, encrypted the computers and all the information on it, and asked for a ransom. If that ransom wasn't paid in Bitcoin, nobody was going to be able to access the machine. A lot of, not only the NHS, but a lot of people were impacted. A lot of multinational organizations were impacted, and some of them paid up to have that information unencrypted. Now, if you had backups of that information, brilliant. You can just rebuild the systems and away you go. And that talks to the sort of disaster recovery business continuity aspect of information systems. However, in this case, this was more about privacy and embarrassing the company. And embarrassing the company would mean they run a risk of losing clients. I mean, who wants to put their data, who wants to entrust their data to an organization that can't look after it?
I mean, in this transition we're making now towards fintech and regtech, we're now getting into a situation where financial institutions are more and more digitalized, and now even regulators conceptually going forward becoming more and more digitalized, because otherwise they can't manage, the regulatory aspects of this whole fintech universe. That makes us all the more vulnerable, doesn't it?
It does indeed. And with the advent of any kind of technology, and technology is, with the world today, is awash with technology, there is more risk. The more it's adopted, the bigger the risk. So you will probably find that regulators are going to start clamping down on various business practices in the financial sector in South Africa, just as they have done in a variety of places around the world. One of the most stringent regulators is the Singapore MAS. And they take no prisoners. They are incredibly strict with data privacy, as is the European Union with the enactment of their new General Data Protection Regulation law.
Yeah, thank you very much for those insights, Trey, and have a good night. I'll hand over to you, Kim.